it mean to wear a headscarf?
Yeah, I love this question because, again, it reminds me of the whole concept of Allah, right? When I say Allah, that's very foreign to you, isn't it? You don't immediately think, oh, that's God, right? And now, again, when it comes to the headscarf, it's something that is almost, it's become a stereotype or a symbol that's used to represent, some kind of oppressive act that Islam does to women, right? If we just be open about it. But the funny thing is the covering of the hair or the head of a woman wasn't something that was invented or introduced by Islam. So, of course, the most obvious example would be Mother Mary, Christianity, who covered exactly the same way that we Muslim women do. And if you go to any traditional community that still exists in the world today, whether, that is an Orthodox Jewish community, my late Greek Orthodox grandmother always wore a veil on her head. And in Corinthians in the Bible, you'll find the veil being spoken about before entering the church. It is a concept. It is an identity, it is sort of a mark of dignity and a dress code for women that is eternal. It's not something that was introduced by Islam. So that's the first thing that is really important for me to point out, because it's a huge misconception. It's quite unfair, really, when people try to sort of grab onto the fact that, I guess, Muslims today have maintained their traditions and they've held on to traditions which other communities and societies have let go of, but most definitely existed in their communities and societies as well. And because we tend to judge the world through the eyes of the age that we live in, and anything that doesn't match up with that is unacceptable, Muslims just stick with what God has decreed in the scripture. And so there are two verses in the Quran, and it's also important to talk about what does the Quran actually say to women? Is it an act of submission to the husband? What does it mean to wear the veil? And it's interesting because when you actually look at the verses, for example, one of the verses says, tell the believing women to draw down their veils, over their adornment, so that they may be known and not harassed and not, be exploited sexually, for example. And the interesting thing was, as an Australian, woman who grew up in Sydney and lived the first 20 years of my life, in a normal, I guess, Aussie sort of cultural family, not very religious, I certainly felt when I adopted a modest dress code and I put on the hijab, there was that initial, that initial worry of being judged by society when I put it on, because I know the perception of what people think it means. I have 4 degrees, for example, I have a doctorate, and I have people, approach me like I can't speak English because of the way I'm dressed, or approach me like I'm not educated because of the way I'm dressed, for example, right? So there's a huge misconception around that. But I think the important things to say, and when it comes down to the experiential, which is one of the categories you've got on your paper, my lived experience as a female in Australia prior to adopting, the Islamic dress code was one that I felt that all of the value that was put upon me in society, or the way I was judged, was according to how I was dressed, and that had to conform to society's dictates as far as what was considered beautiful, acceptable. Now we've got it even worse than the era of the supermodels where I grew up and the magazines. We've got Instagram and we've got social media that says, now we're making our girls so oppressed to the point where they're completely unhappy with everything about themselves that they have to have surgery and cosmetic surgery and breast implants and lip implants and false eyelashes. And for me, that is oppression. For me, telling somebody that they have to change everything about themselves in order to be accepted in society, and that their value comes down to their external appearance, for me, that is oppression. So when I adopted the Islamic dress code, I realized it was like this epiphany that said, all of a sudden, it's nobody's business, what my body looks like. It's nobody's business what color hair I have or what hairstyle I have or how much money I've spent on this or that. I don't have to worry about these things. I'm a servant of God. I'm a servant of no man, of no creation of God, but of God. And God has given us this modest dress code for our own, as to ensure that we're not exploited because of our physical appearance, but it enables us to do absolutely everything in society. As I'm the leader of a school, for example, I've done my education, for example. The veil didn't limit me from doing that. You see my point? So for me, it was an absolute act of liberation to adopt the Islamic dress code and understand its value and its place and its purpose, rather than, I guess, the common perception that it's the exact opposite of that.